The scream came first, sharp, desperate, cutting through the late autumn silence like a torn memory. A child's cry echoed across the crumbling courtyard as two siblings stood frozen, watching the old man stumble forward, his cane tapping wildly against the stone. His blind eyes stared into nothing, but his voice held decades of thunder. "I told you, you'd only come when I died." Then his knees buckled. Papers scattered from his coat like lost pages of a forgotten book, curling in the wind. The daughter, Lena, reached too late. The son, Marcus, didn't move. The silence that followed wasn't grief. It was guilt in disguise. In that courtyard, the truth had just collapsed in front of them. No warning. No forgiveness. Just a father's last sentence hanging in the air like a curse. And somewhere in the wind, the past began to whisper back. The ambulance hadn't yet arrived, but the truth already had. Lena knelt beside her father, brushing trembling fingers over his chest, whispering his name like an apology she never gave. "Papa, please, say something." But there was no answer. Just the slow creak of the wind and the shuffle of Marcus's footsteps. Too little, too late. "He waited for us," Lena said without turning. "All this time, blind, alone." Marcus's voice was a low growl. "He pushed us away. Don't make a saint out of him now." But his eyes said something else. They said he was breaking. Not for the man, but for the little boy who once waited at the gate and was never picked up. And now, that boy's heart was too old to forgive, but still too young to stop hoping. They wrapped the old man's body in a wool blanket as Lena held onto one of the pages, his handwriting faint, lines of a poem half smeared by time. "What is it?" Marcus asked, voice cold. She read aloud. "To the children I raised in my silence, may you one day find the sound of your own forgiveness." Marcus looked away. He never once said sorry. Lena folded the paper slowly. Maybe this was all he had left. The words didn't heal, but they made the silence louder. A silence filled with memories they tried to forget. A kitchen where no one spoke. A bedroom door that never opened. A man who never said he loved them, yet left behind poetry about the pain he never shared. Inside the small apartment above the courtyard, dust floated in the golden light. The air was heavy with years of unopened drawers and unsaid words. Lena moved through the room like a ghost, touching faded photographs and broken frames. On the desk, dozens of notebooks, each filled with verses, some angry, some broken, some hauntingly beautiful. "He wrote about us," she whispered. Marcus remained in the doorway, staring at a cracked photo of their mother. "She left because of him." Lena turned. "Or because we became him." Neither had an answer. Only the weight of inheritance passed down in silence. And now, pages of unwritten apologies begged to be read by the children who were never told they were loved. The old man's funeral was scheduled for dawn, but the siblings didn't sleep. They sat in silence in the apartment, surrounded by his words, his absence, and their grief. At 3:00 a.m., Lena finally spoke. "Do you think he ever loved us?" Marcus didn't look up. "I think he didn't know how." Her voice broke. "Why didn't he tell us?" "Because he thought survival was enough," Marcus replied. "He didn't understand love needed words too." The clock ticked. Pages rustled as wind slid through the cracked window. And in that quiet they both wept, not for the man who died, but for the children they used to be, still waiting on a porch, hoping he'd come home a different man. Lena stared at the mirror in her childhood room, but the reflection didn't show the woman who built a career, moved cities, and broke hearts. It showed a girl in pigtails clutching a notebook, waiting for her father to read her poems. He never did. "I used to write just to get his attention," she whispered. Behind her, Marcus entered with a box labeled, "Lena's drawings, found this in the attic. He kept them all." Her breath caught. "Even the one I tore up?" Marcus nodded. "Especially that one." The memory split her in two. The day she screamed at her father that he didn't care. The night she burned her poems in rebellion. But he had gathered the ashes, stored the scraps. Maybe love isn't loud. Maybe it hides in silence. And that's what hurt the most, realizing he had loved her in the only way he knew how. Marcus lit a cigarette on the back porch, even though he hadn't smoked in years. The night was quiet, but his mind roared. He used to hit the wall, he muttered. Whenever I cried. Lena sat beside him, her eyes searching the stars. Why didn't we ever talk about it? Because he called it discipline, Marcus said bitterly. And we called it normal. He pulled something from his pocket, a broken compass. Found it in his drawer. Remember this? Lena nodded. You gave it to him the day Mom left. I thought if he had direction, maybe he'd stop being lost. The compass needle trembled. So did Marcus' voice. They were children then. And children make gifts out of hope. But when those hopes are never returned, they turn to rust inside. A faded letter fell out of a book. Lena unfolded it slowly. The handwriting wasn't their father's, it was their mother's. I can't stay where silence is punishment. The letter read. I need to breathe where words are allowed. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, reading in silence. The ending stung. Tell the children I didn't leave them, I left the silence. Marcus whispered, she never called. Lena replied, maybe she was ashamed. Or maybe afraid we hated her. For years, they thought their mother abandoned them. But now, truth carved a new wound. She had left not because she didn't care, but because she could no longer survive the emptiness their father buried them in. Sometimes, love escapes not to abandon, but to survive. One notebook stood out, its cover darker, worn down more than the rest. Lena opened it. It's not poetry, she whispered. It's confessions. Page after page, their father had written of his regrets. Missed birthdays, punishments too harsh, words never spoken. Marcus read aloud, voice cracking. I did not know how to say I was proud, so I stayed silent. But my silence was not emptiness, it was cowardice. Lena couldn't breathe. The man they hated had hated himself more. Each page bled with self-loathing and helplessness. And yet, he never said any of it aloud. Not even on his deathbed. Lena said, he wanted us to read it after he died. Marcus replied, because he was never brave enough to look us in the eye. Love unspoken can still be love. But it wounds deeper than hate. They stood over the father's grave before sunrise, the grass still wet with dew, their breath visible in the cold. Lena placed the notebook at the base. Let him rest with his words. Marcus nodded, holding the compass tight. But we carry the silence no more. They didn't know what forgiveness meant yet, not fully. But they knew what cycles felt like. And this one had to end here. Let's write again, Lena whispered. But this time, to each other. Marcus smiled faintly. And read it out loud. The old poet had died with guilt in his heart. But his children chose something different, not to bury pain but to give it air. Sometimes healing begins not with a scream, but a sentence finally spoken. The postman had stopped delivering letters months ago. But the mailbox, rusted, jammed, still held something. Marcus pried it open with a grunt. Inside, envelopes. Dozens. All addressed to Lena and him. These were never sent, Lena whispered, holding one with trembling fingers. The handwriting was shaky. From the father. Each envelope bore different dates. Birthdays, graduations, even random Tuesdays. Inside were letters filled with confessions, questions, poems. Some were angry. Others hopeful. One simply said, Did you eat today? Lena sat on the steps, crying softly. He never mailed them. He wrote them, but he never sent them. Marcus's voice was hollow. Maybe he thought we wouldn't read them. But they were reading now. And every unopened envelope held a father trying, failing, to reach his children. Lena unfolded another letter, this one dated 5 years ago. Her eyes skimmed, then widened. It's about you, she said softly. Marcus looked away. He wrote that you reminded him of himself. That he feared you'd hate him because you inherited his silence. Marcus froze. The lines continued. My boy, you break things when you don't understand how to feel. But I see myself in you. And I'm sorry I didn't teach you better. Marcus's voice cracked. I did become him. Not because I wanted to. Because I didn't know how not to. Lena placed the letter in his hand. Then break the pattern now. Marcus stared at the ink. His father's words had come too late. But even late truths can cut deep. And maybe, just maybe, they can also stitch something back together. Later that night, Lena opened a letter addressed to My Little Poet. Her hands trembled. Inside were verses, unfinished poems written in her style. Her father had copied her childhood rhymes and added lines of his own. I never read them out loud because I feared I'd ruin them, he wrote. But I read every word when you weren't looking. She pressed the page to her chest, sobbing. I thought I was invisible to him. Marcus sat beside her, quiet. Lena whispered, all my life I searched for his validation. And he had already given it, just not in front of me. Some loves are silent, not because they don't exist, but because the one who feels them never learned how to speak. And some children grow up thinking they were unloved, when they were only unread. The siblings stood in a sterile hospital archive, the buzz of fluorescent lights above them. Lena had insisted. Something in her father's journals hinted at repeated hospital visits. The nurse returned with a folder. Your father was here often, she said softly. Inside, reports dated for years. Vision loss, chronic pain, and one note scribbled by hand on the back of a discharge form. Didn't tell the kids, don't want them to worry. Lena clutched the paper. Marcus whispered, he was hurting. And still protected us. She nodded. All we saw was the anger, not the pain. The blind poet hadn't been weak. He had been breaking quietly. And sometimes, the loudest suffering comes from the ones who never ask for help. That night Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood in the kitchen, staring at the stained counter where his father used to sit silently. I hated this man, he muttered, for everything he wasn't. Lena entered, gently. And now? He laughed bitterly. Now I hate how much I understand him. Lena leaned against the doorframe. That's what grief is. Not just missing someone, but learning them too late. Marcus nodded slowly. And he reached for a pen and scribbled on a napkin. I forgive you. Lena blinked. To him. He shook his head. To me. That was the shift. Not erasing pain, but choosing not to carry it forward. Marcus didn't know how to love better yet. But for the first time he wanted to try. The knock on the door came just after noon. Lena opened it to find a frail woman, late 60s, eyes cautious, voice soft. I was his nurse. For the last 2 years. Marcus stepped forward. He had a nurse? She nodded. He didn't want you to know, said it would burden you. But he left something. For both of you. She handed over a sealed envelope. Inside one line. Forgive me for what I couldn't say. Go to the attic. Lena's breath hitched. Marcus frowned. What else did he hide? The woman hesitated. You should see for yourselves. As she turned and walked away, the silence she left behind felt different. Not empty, but charged. Like the moment before a thunderstorm, when the wind changes and the truth waits to strike. The attic smelled like dust, regret, and old summers. Sunlight sliced through wooden beams as Marcus forced open a weathered chest. Inside, photographs, documents, and a worn leather journal. Lena flipped through its pages. Dates, addresses, names they didn't recognize. Who are these people? She asked. At the back of the journal, a torn photo fell out. 3 children. One was clearly Marcus. The second looked like Lena. But the third, a boy they had never seen, stood between them. The note on the back read, My son, David. The one they never knew. Silence dropped like a stone. Marcus whispered, There was another? Lena's voice cracked. And we never knew? Their father's silence had a deeper wound. One stitched not just with regret, but with abandonment, secrecy, and shame. Lena flipped through the journal again. Page after page chronicled David, born before them, sent to live with relatives after their mother left. She couldn't care for all three, their father had written. So I gave one away. I hated myself every day after. Marcus stumbled back. He gave away his child, like luggage. But Lena read more. He tried to reach out. David never answered. A letter was tucked inside. I am not your son. You gave up that right. Marcus's voice was sharp. He lied to us our whole lives. Lena shook her head. No, he buried a part of himself. That's not lying. That's bleeding in silence. The realization tore open a new truth. They weren't just mourning a father. They were mourning a brother they never had the chance to love. They returned to the envelope the nurse had delivered. Tucked behind the main letter was a second, longer note. If you're reading this, then I failed again. I couldn't face you with the truth. I gave away my first son out of fear, and I spent the rest of my life trying to make up for it by holding on too tightly to you two. The words blurred in Lena's hands. I thought if I loved you too hard, you'd never leave. Marcus read aloud. But love without freedom is a prison. I became the father I feared. Silent, stern, and scared. They were never unloved. But they were loved by a man haunted by his own choices. And that kind of love, even when true, always leaves shadows. That evening, Lena picked up the old family portrait again, the one that always sat above the mantel. This time she noticed the corner was loose. Behind the photo was another, David, older, mid-teens, sitting alone on a porch. The back read, "He looks like Marcus did at that age." Lena whispered, "He kept him close, even when he couldn't have him." Marcus slowly nodded. So much pain in one man, and no one to help him carry it. The frame cracked as Lena held it tighter. Not out of rage, but recognition. The picture wasn't perfect. The family never was. But for the first time, they saw their father not just as a failure, but as a man drowning in the consequences of a decision he never forgave himself for. Sometimes the deepest betrayal is the one a person commits against themselves. The rain started just after midnight. Heavy, relentless. Lena stood in the living room doorway, arms crossed, breath uneven. We need to talk about it. Marcus didn't turn from the window. About what? Everything, she snapped. The lies. The silence. Him. Us. He spun around, eyes burning. What do you want me to say, Lena? That I'm okay with it, that I forgive him? His voice cracked. I don't. Lena's fists clenched. Neither do I. But carrying it like this, it's killing us. The air between them pulsed with years of buried blame. It wasn't just about their father anymore. It was about the echoes they carried in their own voices. The way Marcus shut down. The way Lena overreached. They weren't just his children. They were his reflection. Lena's voice lowered, shaking. You think I don't hate him too? For never showing up when I needed him? Marcus laughed bitterly. You got his praise. I got his punishment. We both got scraps, Lena snapped. And we turned on each other instead of him. That stopped him. Silence hung thick. Then she whispered, Do you know why I moved away? Marcus looked up, startled. I was pregnant once. Lost it. Never told anyone. He sent me a letter that week. Said he felt something was wrong. Her voice cracked. It was the only time I thought he actually saw me. Marcus stepped forward. The storm softened outside. I didn't know, none of us knew anything, she said, because none of us ever talked. And in that moment, they finally did. Marcus placed a blank page on the table. We have to find him. Lena shook her head. He doesn't want to be found. That letter said it all. Marcus stared at the page. Then we send this. Whether he reads it or not, we tell him. He began writing. David, we didn't know. But we know now, and we're sorry, not just for our father, but for us too. Lena added her own line, you deserved a family, and if you ever want one, we're here. They didn't sign it with their names. Just your siblings. Not a demand. Not a guilt trip. Just an open door. Ha! Because forgiveness isn't a destination. It's a direction. And sometimes, the first step is simply saying, you were never forgotten. They stood in the backyard under a silver moon, holding pages of their father's darkest writings, the ones filled with shame, cruelty, and fear. What are we doing? Lena asked softly. Marcus struck a match. Letting go. One by one, they fed the fire. Regret. Pain, dirt wall. Words that haunted them all. As the flames danced, Lena whispered, he wrote his guilt, but never gave himself peace. Marcus nodded. Maybe we can. The last page turned to ash. Not out of hatred, but hope. They didn't burn the memories. Only the burden. And in the orange glow, for the first time since their father's death, they weren't carrying him. They were releasing him. At sunrise, they sat on the front porch with coffee in silence. Not the silence of avoidance, but of mutual understanding. Lena rested her head on Marcus' shoulder. I never thought we'd survive him. Marcus exhaled. We didn't. He looked at her. But maybe we survived, because of each other. A bird landed nearby. The sky bloomed with pink and gold. Lena whispered, I want to write again. Marcus smirked. Then write, and this time, I'll read every word. She smiled through her tears. Not all broken families mend. But sometimes broken pieces can form a new mosaic, raw, real, and beautiful. The blind poet had written in silence. His children now would write aloud. Lena stood outside their old elementary school, staring at the rusted gate and worn brick walls. He used to wait here, she said softly. Marcus glanced around. Every Friday, after work. I forgot that. I didn't, she whispered. Until he stopped showing up. They both stared at the bench under the maple tree, the one their father used to sit on, notebook in hand. It hit them then. He was there not to watch them. He was trying to figure out how to talk to them. He loved us, Marcus said slowly. Just never knew how to love without fear. Lena nodded. And we judged him by what he failed to say, not by what he tried to become. The echoes of the past still whispered here. But they no longer screamed. They had softened into memory. Back home, Lena opened one last sealed envelope. Inside was a poem, the final one. Titled, To the Ones Who Waited. The words were simple, uneven, and unfinished. I was not a father you deserved, but I was a man who watched you grow, praying I'd one day find the words. Lena read aloud, voice breaking. Marcus sat across from her, silent. The poem ended, mid-sentence. But it didn't feel incomplete. He tried, Lena said. Every way he could, he tried. And maybe that was enough. Not for the pain to vanish, but for it to make sense. They didn't get the father they wanted, but they got a man who wrestled with his ghosts until the very end. A man who left behind more than silence. He left them a mirror, and finally, a voice. The mailbox stood like a silent monument at the end of the lane. Marcus slid the letter to David into the slot, exhaling deeply. Do you think he'll ever read it? Lena asked. Maybe, Marcus replied. Or maybe he won't. She nodded. But we sent it. That matters. And it did. Because reaching out, even into silence, was still an act of healing. Forgiveness wasn't always reciprocal. Sometimes it was one-sided, a gift you give to yourself. As they walked away, neither looked back. They didn't need to. The letter was more than a message. It was a bridge. Even if David never crossed it, they had built it. And that meant the weight wasn't theirs to carry anymore. In a corner room of the house, covered in sheets, sat an old piano. Lena pulled back the cloth slowly. Dust swirled. He used to play before Mom left, she murmured. Marcus nodded. Stopped after, like everything else. She ran her fingers across the keys. The sound was cracked, hesitant. But it was still music. Do you remember this melody? She asked. Marcus closed his eyes. It's what he played when he thought we were asleep. Lena pressed the keys again. Not perfectly, but with intention. And soon the house that once echoed with silence now hummed with imperfect notes, notes that carried memory, regret, and something else, courage. The courage to create sound in a space once dominated by silence. At a local community gathering, Lena took the stage with trembling hands. This was written by someone who didn't know how to speak his truth. But he tried. She unfolded the final poem. The crowd listened. Marcus stood in the back, nodding quietly. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. She stepped down slowly, tears in her eyes. Marcus met her at the exit. He would have been terrified to read that out loud, he said. Lena smiled faintly. So I did it for him. Her voice was steady now. Strong. Because sometimes healing isn't found in closure. It's found in continuation, speaking the words they couldn't, and living the truth they never learned to say. The house felt lighter. Not emptier, just unburdened. Lena folded the last of the photo albums into a box, pausing on a snapshot of their father beside a river, eyes closed, head tilted toward the sun. He wasn't blind then, Marcus said. But maybe he still didn't see us. Lena smiled gently. Or maybe he saw more than we thought, just didn't know how to tell us. They didn't speak after that. Didn't need to. The rooms no longer echoed with pain, only memory. As they sealed the last box, Lena whispered, "Do you think we'll forget?" Marcus shook his head. Not forget. We'll just remember, differently. Grief changes shape. So does love. And in this house, once haunted, once silent, there now lived peace. Earned. Imperfect. Whole. They drove to the river from the photograph, a place their father often wrote about but never explained. It was quiet there, framed by tall reeds and smooth stones. Lena sat near the edge, letting the breeze move her hair. He used to come here alone, she said. Marcus nodded. Probably to write, or to grieve. She dipped her fingers in the water. Maybe both. They didn't speak much after that. The river didn't need commentary. It told its own stories. And maybe that's what their father had done too. Told his story in gestures, in silence, in pages left hidden. Marcus placed a stone by the shore. To him, he said. Not in honor of his mistakes, but in acknowledgement of his journey. A week later, an envelope arrived. No return address. Just 2 words, thank you. Inside, a short note. I'm not ready. But I read every word. Maybe one day. It was signed, DD2. Lena held it to her chest, eyes brimming. Marcus exhaled slowly. It's something. She nodded. It's everything. They didn't push. Didn't reply. They just sat with it, this small miracle of acknowledgement. A seed planted in fractured soil. Whether it bloomed or withered wasn't up to them. The message had been received. And sometimes the only way to begin again is with a whisper from the past that says, I heard you. Months later, Lena stood in a small library, reading her own poem to a group of children. Her voice steady, her hands open. To the ones who waited for love that never came the right way. This is for you. In the back, Marcus watched her, notebook in hand. He'd started writing too. Not for others. Just for himself. They hadn't erased their pain. They'd transformed it. Recycled it into something tender, teachable. A child raised by silence now used words like lanterns. And a man who once closed every door was finally learning to knock. They weren't perfect. But they were present. And presence finally was enough. In a notebook of her own, Lena wrote a line she didn't plan to publish. She simply needed it to exist. He didn't leave us words, he left us the ache to create our own. Later, she tucked it away, kissed the page, and shut the cover. On the porch, Marcus joined her. Do you think he'd be proud? She smiled. I think he already was. He just didn't know how to say it. A breeze passed through the trees. The wind, once sharp, now felt like an embrace. The house behind them stood quiet, but not cold. Lena whispered, sometimes the only way to forgive your father is to become the one who finally learns to speak. And in that final breath, the story lived on, not as pain, but as poetry.